Most parents think that they have to wait for summer break to take their kids on a big trip. Well, Nick Reyes from Frequent Miler had a different idea. He pulled his kids out of school for 3 months, homeschooled them while traveling through places like French Polynesia and Europe, and then re-enrolled them when they got home. So today we're talking about how he made that work, what his kids learned from that experience, and how points and miles made it all possible. But then in the second half of the show, we're diving deep into Avianca LifeMiles, covering sweet spots, subscription strategies, and why this often overlooked program can save families a surprising number of points. And don't end the episode early, because shortly after we recorded this episode, Avianca made some major changes to LifeMiles. So Nick was so gracious to go ahead and record an update for us. So at the end of the show, he's going to join us with exactly what's changed and what travelers need to know now. So if you ever wondered how to travel the world with kids, or how to get more value out of a lesser known airline, well, this is an episode that you're going to want to save. Welcome to the Revolutionizing Your Journey podcast. I'm your host, DeAndre Koch. I am so excited for today's guest, but before we introduce him, a few housekeeping reminders as always. Remember, you can catch all of these episodes in their full entirety on our YouTube channel, as well as for those that watch this on YouTube. I know most of our listeners are on audio. We do have our quick hits that comes out every single Friday. That is our news in the world of all the news, I should say, in the world of points and miles and travel that releases every single Friday. And we do have our vlog style YouTube channel as well. And wherever you're listening or watching this, please don't forget to give us a like. We want to subscribe, a 5-star rating, and a review as well. And if you're new to our show and you're like, hey, I'm a beginner, I just want to find the episodes that are catered towards beginners, don't forget we do have our podcast library that is linked on the show as well, in their show notes, I should say. And that actually has the place where you can search through our entire catalog if you want episodes just for beginners or intermediate or hotel strategies, whatever it may be, you can find them there. Now, I'm super excited to introduce Nick Reyes to the show. You will very likely have recognized his voice if you haven't met him in person. He is the other half of the Frequent Miler podcast team. And Nick, we got a chance to connect in Points Travel Festival Toronto. We had some great conversations there. I'm super excited to have you on the show. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It was a lot of fun getting a chance to finally meet you in person and get to know you a little bit. So, when it came up that we could maybe do this and have a conversation here today, I was super excited about it. So I am ready to rock and roll.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I know when we were talking through either whether it was just the bus rides or walking or just in between the different sessions at the conference, we talked through a lot of amazing things in the world of points and miles. And I know a few months ago we had Greg on the show and Greg was like, hey, you have to have the rest of the team. So I've been excited to get this lined up for a while now. And as we were talking, we talked through two topics that I thought were just very, very interesting. One was the fact that you've actually pulled your kids out of school to homeschool them while traveling and then re-enrolled them. So that I think is just a fascinating conversation piece because I know so many of our listeners are parents and have children where they could be considering something like this. But then secondly, we got into a conversation about Avianca LifeMiles, which is such a niche area of points and miles that I was like, hey, I want to talk about these two things on the show because I think these two things would be so fascinating for listeners to hear. And so that's going to be really the framework or the onus of the conversation today. But before we get into all of that, Nick, can you give us a little bit of a background of, for those who aren't familiar with you, where do you live and how did you really get into this world of points and miles?
Yeah, so I live in upstate New York, a small town in the mountains, beautiful, peaceful, quiet, kind of boring, but it's nice to have it that way at home because then we get out and travel quite a bit. So my wife and I have been together for 20 years now, and in the beginning, we discovered a love of travel. We enjoyed traveling together on a shoestring budget, kind of backpacker style, on and off for years. And then when we decided that we were going to settle down and get married, and have a family, we thought we'd have one last hurrah and maybe do one big round-the-world trip. And this was all before we had discovered miles and points. We had just been traveling as cheaply as we could, working hard for months at a time and then taking off and traveling somewhere. And so when we got ready to settle down, we said, okay, we're going to do one more around the world trip. And I spent some time reading about how to do that. And I stumbled on blogs about miles and points and how you could use them to travel around. And so I really started to kind of dig into that. I met some people who are into the hobby. Someone suggested I go to a conference, and I saw actually Greg, the owner of Frequent Milers, speak, and he really kind of blew my mind. And so I spent about a year reading blogs and then about a year collecting miles and points. And for our honeymoon after we got married, we spent 4 months traveling around the world, mostly business and first class, staying at hotels we never would have imagined when we were, spending $4 a night for a hostel somewhere. And now all of a sudden we were staying at luxury properties. And so it was a complete shift, and we had so much fun. We had a great time, and we said, wow, we got to do more of this. And so we got home and started collecting points for the next trip. And then about a year after our honeymoon, I guess, maybe 2, I can't remember exactly, but Frequent Miler had an opportunity for a full-time writer. And my wife saw it, and I saw it, and we both really loved Frequent Miler. And so I threw my hat in the ring, and I often say I won the employment lottery. And so about 9 years, a little more than 9 years ago now, I started working full-time at Frequent Miler. And so I've been writing about miles and points and traveling around the world ever since. So when we had kids, we continued that on. I think we never expected it to be this way, but we've really enjoyed it.
So, Nick, I love that background, and I got to bring up a fun conversation that we had at the end of the festival, because you and I have some semantic differences in our phrasing or saying, where you say miles and points, I say points and miles. We started this whole debate at the conference, and I'm actually curious. I want the listeners to weigh in on this either in the comments or whatever it may be. Is it points and miles or miles and points? Because you're going to hear us use this differently. I will say at the Points Travel Festival Toronto, I think points and miles won out, but we'll see what the listeners say. So I'm super curious as to what that's going to be. That's not the onus of the show at all, but as you were talking, that reminded me of this huge debate we had at 1 a.m. in the hotel lobby, basically. So, Nick, let's talk about what happened or the strategy you employed with your kids, right? Because I don't think I've ever heard of someone saying, hey, I temporarily homeschooled my kids for a few months and then re-enrolled them back into school. So I would love to hear more about that experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about the story behind this trip that we wanted to make this happen or that allowed you to do this?
Sure. So we have long loved travel. And so many years ago, we had read an article about a couple of teachers that took their kids out of school for a year and did a bicycle trip from Alaska to Argentina. And they taught their kids math through currency conversion and history kind of hands-on. And so we read that years before we had kids. And we said, wow, wouldn't that be awesome to do someday? So that was something we kind of always had in the back of our mind. But it was also kind of intimidating because we had always been under the impression that homeschooling was an all or nothing thing, that, if you decide to homeschool your kids, you're homeschooling for an entire year, and you need to be able to keep up on all the work and do a good job with that. And what we learned over time was we got to know some people who are homeschooling. It's become more and more popular. We live in a rural area, and there are quite a few people in groups around here that are homeschooling. And as we got to know some people who were in that community, we learned that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing. At least in my state, in New York State, and I assume probably other states are similar, you can homeschool at any time. You can take your kids out to homeschool at any time you want, and you can re-enroll them at any time you want. Now, there may be some complication. We'll talk about that probably from school to school, but at least in my state, again, the school can't stop you from doing that. And in fact, it was far easier than we expected. So as we started to do research into that, we decided, we're going to try this for a quarter and see how it goes. And there were a number of reasons for that. Number one, of course, we wanted to keep it a manageable trip. So 3 months seemed more manageable than the majority of a year. Number two, while I have a lot of faith in my ability and my wife's ability to teach topics, and our kids are young, so it's not as though they're doing topics that are too difficult for us to kind of teach, we also aren't teachers. We aren't trained teachers, and I understand the benefit of somebody who's a professional teacher. And so I figured, well, this way, 3/4 of the year, they get the benefit of a professional teacher. And so a quarter of the year, we can throw our hats in the ring, give this a shot, and see how it goes. And, even if we don't do a great job, they're not going to fall too far behind, at least. So that seemed like a more manageable goal when we kind of got started with the thought of doing this.
So I know you said it was a fairly easy process and was easier than you expected. Did you get any sort of pushback on this? Like, how did you approach the school to make this happen? If someone's hearing this and they're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know I could do this, what would you tell them would be the steps to kind of actually make this thing a thing?
Yeah, so it was actually far easier than I expected. I called the school and just spoke to somebody in the office. And by the time I called, I had already had some familiarity with how it was going to work just based on talking to other people who homeschool. But my small local school, and when I say small, I live in a very small town. K through 12 is like 250 kids maybe. So I live in a very, very small town. And even my small town school has a homeschool liaison, a person whose job is to communicate with folks who are homeschooling. So I got connected with that person, and they told me what I had known at that point already, that all I needed in order to homeschool was to submit a letter of intent to homeschool to the school. And I think the requirement is to do that at least 2 weeks in advance. I did it farther in advance than that, but there's not a huge advance requirement. And then in New York State, in my state, you have to submit what they call an IHIP, an individualized home instruction program. And that sounds intimidating and as though it's going to be a lot of paperwork and work, but in reality, it's not. It's literally a one-page Word document with a very rough outline of what you intend to do. So you have the required subjects that you need to go over, like geography, U.S. history, science, health and safety. And all that's required is to give some bullet points as to how you intend to meet those requirements. And so to give an example or two, for physical education, our bullet point said various activities, including daily walking, often several miles a day, swimming, biking, snorkeling, hiking, and ice skating. And that is what we needed to submit in terms of a plan for physical education. For science, we talked about how we planned to visit the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles and how we intended to snorkel and identify sea life and talk about the formation of the islands of French Polynesia through volcanoes. And again, these were just bullet points with kind of a rough outline as to how we intended to approach those topics. And that's all that's required in New York State. And then we kept a journal, a spreadsheet each day, recording what we had gone over that day so that we would have that paperwork should it be necessary to submit it. Though when we re-enrolled the kids, we didn't have to submit any additional paperwork with them. I believe at the end of the quarter, you may be required to submit some sort of evaluation from the quarter. But as it turned out, we didn't even have to do that. Re-enrolling was very simple. It was just sending an email with the day we were intending to re-enroll. And I did that a couple of weeks in advance, and that was no problem either. Now, caveat, I live in a very small town with a very small school. So for us, the stakes were pretty low in the sense that there's one teacher for each grade. So when we pulled our kids out and brought our kids back, we knew that they were going to be in the same classroom with the same friends and the same teacher. And that also made it easy for us to communicate with the teachers. We actually approached each teacher and sat down and had a meeting to just ask them what they intended to go over. The school is not required to provide any materials or any information in that regard. However, what we were hoping was to get an idea of, which spelling words are they going to go over in school so that when our kids come back, they're, sort of more or less up to speed with their peers. And so the teachers were fantastic. They were so supportive, and so was the school. They thought it was a fantastic opportunity for the kids. They understood our motivation and desire to use this to educate the kids. And so the teachers actually provided tons of material, and they're not required to do that. But our kids' teachers provided us with tons of the worksheets and handouts and reading materials that they were going to use in class so that we could do those same things as we traveled so that our kids would have the same background knowledge that their friends and peers would have. So that actually worked out really well. I was amazed at how supportive they were and how excited about it the teachers were and happy to share information. And these days with digital communication, it was easy to kind of stay in touch and see, okay, where are they and where are we, and kind of compare in order to keep up.
That's awesome, Nick. I think it's so unique what you did, and that's something that I had never heard of before. And I would assume, and again, not having kids myself, I don't know 100%, but I assume most parents probably aren't aware that that's something that's even in the realm of possibility, especially for those that are in the points and mile space and want to do bigger trips, and they're trying to only align it with summer break and spring break. We always hear about the difficulties of that because everyone that's in points and miles is trying to redeem basically for the same weeks out of the year. This provides provides a little bit of a different opportunity there. Before we actually go into what the trip was like specifically, because I'm sure there's some points and mile strategies that were in there, I'm very curious from a structure standpoint, were you very intentional on, hey, this is our time of learning, like a 9 to 1 or whatever it may be, or was it just like, hey, this is on the agenda for today and we're going to integrate, different points of knowledge or education through it? How did you kind of structure a day or a week, essentially?
That's a great question. So if you talk to people who homeschool, most people will tell you, at least at the elementary age, that most of the actual school work can be done in probably 2 hours or less oftentimes, because if you can get the kids focused and you have a small group, just 2 kids, then you can accomplish a lot in a much shorter period of time. So the schoolwork itself doesn't take up nearly as much time as what you might expect if you're imagining a traditional school day. There's a lot of extra time built in there because there's a lot of classroom management, a lot of other things you have to handle. So it was far easier from that standpoint. Now, we had a rough outline each day where we would get up and go to breakfast and come back to the room and spend an hour to 2 hours working on some schoolwork. And so my kids are usually up around 7 o'clock in the morning. So we were usually done with breakfast by about 8. And so maybe we would spend 8 to 10 a.m. in the room getting some schoolwork done, getting some of my work done because I was still working during this time. And then we'd go out and explore for 4 or 5 hours, come back to the room, get cleaned up, get ready to go to dinner, and either do some more schoolwork before dinner, or more often than not, we would actually just bring the schoolwork with us to dinner, because there's that window of time from when you're seated until you can place your order and your food comes. And often that's a window of 30 or 40 minutes. And anybody with kids knows that that's the danger zone right there, because the kids are going to get impatient waiting for the food and asking when it's going to come, or they're going to have a hard time sitting, or they're going to be hanging on you, or they're going to be doing some combination of all of those things. And so bringing some schoolwork to dinner was a great way to kind of, sidestep that and focus for a little bit before the food came. So that would give us some time to get anything extra done. We also planned a lot of schoolwork on travel days, because we'd be in a lounge in an airport, and that was an easy time with fewer distractions, fewer, more interesting things going on. So we could kind of focus and hone in on schoolwork there. So structurally, that was essentially the main structure, but we also just kind of wanted to dig into what each day presented. And so there were opportunities along the way that we didn't expect. And I know we'll probably talk about where we went and when, but to give an example, we started out at Atlantis in the Bahamas, and that was actually something that we just intended to be fun. We just intended to, enjoy some time on the water slides and kind of have a relaxing introduction to this greater adventure. But they have a fantastic aquarium there, and we didn't expect that. I say fantastic. It's not comparable to Atlanta or Osaka or some of the other big ones around the world, but it was surprisingly good. And so we spent much longer than I would have anticipated going through the aquarium, because my kids had questions about a lot of the sea life. And so they wanted to know, what does this, this animal eat? And, what types of areas does this animal live? And et cetera, et cetera. And so we would dig into things like that, where we'd say, okay, well, they're curious. And if we don't know the answers, of course, these days, it's super easy to look it up on the phone, make me find a video. And so there were a lot of times where we would dig into something like that we didn't necessarily have on the agenda, but that would absolutely meet the requirements for doing some science study, and in many cases take things deeper than what they would have gotten at a surface level just looking at a handout or reading through a book. So we were able to do a lot of that kind of stuff throughout the day that really did kind of meet the spirit of the requirements for the level of education that they're at, without necessarily being schoolworky, without feeling like it was schoolwork to the kids, but still very much a learning experience.
I absolutely love that, essentially. I mean, you really created, as you said, like an experience that didn't necessarily have to feel like they were just sitting in school to be able to do. So I want to talk through the trip a little bit more. So you said you started in the Atlantis, the Bahamas. So kind of beautiful aquarium, water slides, blue waters, kind of just for fun. And then at some point you ended out, it sounded like in California, La Brea, and because you built some instruction into there. Can you talk a little bit about what the trip was like in the whole, and maybe just kind of on a higher level, right? Because from a point standpoint, I think it'd be really interesting for the parents and the listeners to hear, like, what was the points output for a trip like this for so long versus instead of just a week or maybe 2? I mean, this was 3 months with all the kids, with the whole family, right? So what did that actually look like?
Yeah, so we started out in the Bahamas because I had a free stay at Atlantis from having Caesar's Diamond status in the past. So we started out in the Bahamas. We also were finishing up a promotion that ran last year. It was JetBlue's 25 for 25, and they had run a promotion in 2025 where if you flew to 25 of their destinations by the end of the year, you would get Mosaic 1 status for 25 years and 350,000 points. And so we had made that an adventure that we had mostly completed in the summertime, but we had a couple more stops to go on that. And we had decided to do that because we were able to use other types of points to book those flights, Amex membership rewards points primarily, but we used other points as well in order to pay for the flights for that. And to me, it was very appealing that my kids that were 7 and 4 when this started, 5 by the time it was done, 8 and 5, I guess, early this year when they got status. They're going to have status until they're 30 and 32 years old or 33 years old. And so for me, that was really appealing because I thought, well, maybe they'll graduate high school and go to college and still get an extra legroom seat because of something we did today. And who knows whether JetBlue will last or that status will be honored, but it was kind of a fun thing. So we needed a couple more destinations for that. And so we had decided we would do the Bahamas to start this trip off in order to A, get a couple more JetBlue airports in to finish that off, and B, use that free stay. And like I said, that ended up being more interesting than I think we even expected. From there, we went to Los Angeles, and Los Angeles was another JetBlue destination to finish that off. And the other reason we went to Los Angeles was because my kids do some educational apps, and one of them, I think it was from ABC Mouse, has a unit about the La Brea tar pits, which if you're not familiar with the La Brea tar pits, are these giant tar pits in Los Angeles where lots and lots of animals had gotten stuck over the years, and they've got tons of fossils and things you can go see there. So my kids had done this educational unit on the La Brea tar pits, and they kept asking, can we go to the La Brea tar pits someday? And we've really started to try to lean into those types of requests because we want the kids to be curious and interested in the world. And so as they ask about things like that, visiting things that they're excited about learning about, we've tried to look at it and say, well, we have the miles and points to actually do those things. And so let's go ahead and do it. So we planned that stop in Los Angeles primarily so we could go to the La Brea tar pits, which were fascinating. Not a thing I would have planned a trip around if not for the kids. And I still probably wouldn't necessarily recommend planning a trip to LA just for the La Brea tar pits. But if you're going to LA and you got kids, it's kind of cool. Even if you don't have kids, it was pretty cool to visit the La Brea tar pits and see. I mean, they have an entire wall, hundreds of direwolf skulls, and there's just so many interesting things that live there. I had no idea that there were camels that lived in North America. Yesterday's camel is what it's called. And so we learned about a bunch of things there. And if you asked our kids about the trip, they would tell you about those things from the La Brea tar pits because they really, no pun intended, stuck with them. So that was Los Angeles, and then from there we flew to French Polynesia, and we spent about a week and a half there. So I used Alaska miles to get there, Alaska Atmos points to fly on Air Tahiti Nui. I did that in part because Alaska awards status. Even when you're redeeming miles, you earn credit towards elite status based on the distance flown, if that's the metric you choose. And so I had done that in part because it was a great redemption and in part because it would earn towards elite status. And of course, we were happy to go to French Polynesia. So we flew there and we spent a couple weeks in French Polynesia. We used Hilton points to stay in Moorea at the Hilton Moorea, which was our first time visiting Moorea, which was fantastic. We really enjoyed that. Some cool stuff happened there. And then we went to Bora Bora and spent some time there at 2 different hotels in Bora Bora using Marriott points and a suite upgrade award that really worked out nicely in Bora Bora. Then we came back to the United States via Seattle, again using Alaska points to fly Air Tahiti Nui, and came back over to the East Coast for Thanksgiving in order to spend that with our family, and then took off for Europe. And we spent a few weeks in Europe visiting Christmas markets around Europe. We went to Cologne, Germany, and we went to Strasbourg, France, and we spent about a weekish in northern Finland at a place called Santa Claus Holiday Village in Rovaniemi. It's right on the Arctic Circle. There's this whole little Santa Claus village, and we had been once before, but we wanted to go again while the kids were at an age where that felt magical for them, and it's a lot of fun for us. I think one of the things about traveling with kids, I think a lot of people think of it as being inconvenient and difficult, and there are times when when it is. Don't get me wrong. But a large part of our travels at this point is we want to enjoy those things with the kids because we remember them as much as what they will remember. We enjoy those kind of memories to hang on to. So that was a lot of fun. We spent some time there, and we brought my mother-in-law with us to travel around and visit the Christmas markets. We knew she would love those, and sure enough, she did. And so that gave us some extra help with the kids too. And then we came back. So getting to and from Europe, we used Alaska Atmos points to fly on Condor in one direction again to earn towards elite status with Alaska. And so that worked out nicely for that end of the trip. And we used Avianca LifeMiles, in fact, to fly to Europe. And so we'll talk about some sweet spots with them, I think, a little bit later.
Nick, that was an incredible journey. I mean, you covered hitting warm waters in the Atlantic, warm waters in the Pacific, East Coast, West Coast, Europe. I mean, that's an adventure of a lifetime for your kids, and I'm sure they're at the age where they're going to remember a good amount of those things. And like you said, I think it's really cool that you mentioned as well that it's about the memories also that you and your family, like you and your wife, can have like with the kids also. And I know which I do not subscribe to this. I know I'm in the dink world, right? But I don't subscribe to the mindset of, why, their kids won't remember it, why even bother, right? But I think the fact that the memories you create can be really intentional, really purposeful, and really amazing, and to be able to kind of bring those stories back up to them as they continue to get older as well. I am curious, Nick, with these flights, were these mostly like business class or economy for these longer haul ones? I'm sure some of the domestic ones might have been economy, but when you're flying, across the Europe and such, were you trying to also hit the business class for all 4/5 of you, or were you keeping it with economy?
Yeah, good question. So domestically, we did fly economy on JetBlue in order to hit the last few airports we needed, though I had my wife complete a status match from temporary American Airlines status that she had to JetBlue so that we would have Mosaic 1 benefits. So we were able to select the extra legroom seats on all of our JetBlue flights at check-in. And then, of course, once we completed our 25 destinations, then we had Mosaic 1 status for all of us. But that helped for the domestic legs of the journey. But yes, internationally, it was all business class. So Los Angeles to Papeete, French Polynesia, that was Alaska Atmos points, if I remember correctly, 60,000 points each way in order to get there and fly from there to Seattle as well. So that was, again, business class for the four of us. Now, that's, I think, an important point to bring up because we booked half of that. So we booked the Papeete to Seattle flight first, because I found availability on that. I got a tip from a reader that there's a bunch of availability from Papeete to Seattle, and we had written about it on our blog, and I booked 4 seats in that direction without any plan as to, can we get there? Are we definitely going to go? I don't know. Alaska offers free cancellations. So I knew that if we couldn't make that trip work, I could cancel. But I think that one of the things, especially when you're traveling with a family, is you have to be open to booking what's available when it becomes available. You don't necessarily need the whole trip planned. And so I jumped on that and booked it, I don't know, about almost a year in advance, and said, okay, well, we're going to try to find the other direction. And I used award alert tools to set award alerts for flights in the opposite direction. And I booked some hotel nights that I thought would probably work out depending on when we found an outbound flight, because again, hotels were available. So I jumped on the availability. And again, when you use miles and points, most hotels are freely cancelable. There are different cancellation windows depending on where you are in the world. But I booked all the hotels, and then I set award alerts with an award alert tool for the flights to French Polynesia. And I knew we could get to Los Angeles or Seattle or various different gateways. So I set alerts from different places, and it was months. It was probably 6 months later when I finally got an alert from one of those award alert tools saying, hey, 4 seats are available. And the moment that email came in, I dropped what I was doing and I went and I booked the outbound portion. And then we knew that that trip was locked in, or that part of the trip was locked in. So that was really helpful for booking that end, especially 4 seats. Getting to and from French Polynesia can be really tough. Flying Europe was the same story in the sense that we booked one direction right away and booked the other direction as it became available. I can't remember the order on that. But yes, we flew business class in both directions. Flatbed business class for me is important when we're traveling with a family. I know it's not necessarily important to everybody, but to me it is. It's very helpful when you're traveling with kids for the kids to have a seat that lays flat as a bed and sort of a little cocoon of their own. We found that makes travel day far easier, especially on those long overnight flights. People aren't hanging on each other and disturbing each other. And our kids are pretty accustomed to it now because we've been collecting lots of miles and points for years, and we primarily use our miles for international premium cabin flights, so to make those long flights as comfortable as possible. There's plenty of room for everybody to move around then. Like I said, we don't disturb each other. Our kids are at the point now where they know that if it's an overnight flight, we're going to eat dinner at the airport, and when we get on the plane, as soon as it takes off, we're going to lay down and go to sleep, and they're pretty good about that. So that makes, I think, most of our trips far easier. So getting to Europe, we used Air Canada Aeroplan points, 60,000 points a person to get from the East Coast of the United States, so New York, Boston, to some of Western Europe. And so in that case, we had flown into Germany. So we used Air Canada Aeroplan points for that one. And then on the way back, we used Alaska Atmos points to fly Condor from Frankfurt to New York, and that was 55,000 Alaska Atmos points one way for flatbed business class again on Condor. And so, round trip, that means 135,000 points each to Europe and 120,000 points each between the West Coast and French Polynesia. So relatively reasonable. Now, obviously, it's a lot of points overall, but we earn a lot of points every year. And so we focus on ways to kind of be animalistic about collecting points so that we can redeem them for those comfortable trips.
Hey everyone, quick break from the episode. If you're enjoying the show, make sure you're subscribed on whatever platform you're listening on so you never miss an episode. And if you've gotten any value so far, it would mean the world if you left a quick rating or review. It helps more people discover the show and keeps us motivated to keep creating great content. Also, if you're feeling stuck or want help with points and miles, whether it's picking your first card, planning a big redemption, or even having someone book it all for you, we've got you covered. There's a link in the show notes to schedule a free points and miles consultation. Just fill out a quick questionnaire, tell us your goals, and we'll take it from there. And don't forget, our newsletter and private Facebook group are great ways to stay on top of breaking news, updated card offers, and tips that don't always make it into the podcast. You'll find those links in the show notes as well. Now, back to the episode. Well, Nick, I got a question because you talked through something that I think anyone that's new to the points and miles world, if this is the first episode they're ever hearing, they're going to be like, wait, you booked your return flight before booking your stay or your flight to get there, right? And of course, we know that's a really normal process in the world of booking with points versus paying cash. You kind of find the deal and book the deal as opposed to needing to book specific dates per se. I am curious for you yourself, if that award tool ping never went off, that alert, if you never got that, would you have scrapped the trip entirely or said, okay, we can find the seats in economy, so we'll go in economy? Or would you just said, all right, it's not lie flat, it's a long trip, we're getting older, we need space, back issues, and I feel this in my 30s, so I understand. So what would have been your mindset around that?
Yeah, so actually, I guess I left that part out. We did book economy class flights to get to French Polynesia in case we couldn't find business class. So we probably wouldn't have scrapped that because we were pretty excited about that leg of the trip. But we were certainly hopeful that our award alerts would go off. And so when I say we booked economy class, as right to the point that you just made there, booking a lot of types of awards or booking awards through many different programs can be freely cancelable. And so we, again, booked freely cancelable economy class awards to get to French Polynesia, knowing that we were ultimately looking for business class to open up later on. And I was pretty confident that eventually we would find it. And when I set alerts, so we have a family of 4. It's my wife and I and 2 sons. They're 5 and 8 years old now. And so what I had done was I set alerts for 2 seats in business class because I figured if I can snag 2, then maybe later on 2 more will open up. Or worst case scenario, if we have to split up and take 2 different flights to get to French Polynesia, we could probably make that work. It might not be ideal, but we could make it work. And sure enough, as fate would have it, we did end up getting all 4 seats. But I think we actually, if I remember correctly, we might have even been booked in economy class on 2 separate flights, just like that, 2 and 2 initially, because that's just what was available on the specific day in order to kind of arrive at the same time. I think I had 2 of us departing Seattle and 2 of us departing Los Angeles and meeting up in French Polynesia because those flights land around the same time. But I was confident that an award alert would come up. And as you said, I often encourage people to book what you find available, particularly with points or miles that have free or easy cancellation. And that does vary somewhat. Some of the foreign programs have cancellation fees. And so you do need to be aware of what the rules are for the program you're using. But with so many programs, the US-based programs particularly offering free cancellation or some offering very cheap cancellation from some of the foreign programs, I think it's really worth locking something in, even if you're not sure that the trip is going to happen, because you can always cancel and get your points back, which is a huge difference between cash bookings and the award travel world. As you said, award travel is far more flexible, and that's one of the things that appeals to me. You never know when things might change. You know, we were supposed to go to Fiji a couple of years ago, and we were literally driving to the airport. We stopped in Las Vegas on the way, and then we were going to fly to Los Angeles and on to Fiji. So it was Vegas, LA, Fiji. We were driving to the airport in Las Vegas, and one of my kids threw up in the rental car on the way to the airport. We said, okay, well, we're not going to Fiji today. and luckily we didn't try, because that turned into a whole nightmare, and we ended up stuck in Las Vegas for almost 2 weeks because, of course, one kid got sick and then the second kid got sick, and we just couldn't get on a plane with the way it was. So, you don't know when that's going to happen. And luckily I was able to just cancel everything right there and didn't lose a dime on that trip, canceling everything immediately. So, I think that that's maybe an underrated feature of award travel, is the ability to have that flexibility. So there's very little fear in terms of locking something in and changing plans later if need be.
Got it, Nick. I think that was a fantastic breakdown. We need to transition over to the next part of our discussion. But before we do, one last question when it comes to this. Based on your experience and the pulling kids out of school to homeschool them and re-enrolling them and the trip and the experience overall, would you recommend this to other families kind of in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I have often said that I have learned a lot from travel. And one of the most important things that I've learned from travel is about myself. I've learned about my own biases and what it means to be American, and how that influences my perspective and opinion by seeing a lot of the world. There's so many super educational experiences that I've had along the way that I feel like have shaped who I've become. And so I really believe in kind of the transformational power of travel as an educational tool. And while we visit plenty of museums and we do plenty of things that traditionally look educational, I think there's a lot of education in the other pieces of travel, in terms of being exposed to different places and language and culture and music. And so there's so many opportunities when you're traveling to be able to do that. So, we really enjoy the ability to expose the kids to those things. And sometimes it's really simple things that don't even necessarily have to do with travel, but you find yourself in scenarios where you can teach little lessons. I mean, I'm thinking of even very small and probably in the overall scheme of things, seemingly unimportant stuff, like moments when I'd be sitting in a restaurant alone with one of my sons as he was finishing up dinner or breakfast or whatever it is, and we're listening to the music that's coming over the speakers, and I could talk about the rhythm and the beat and how it differs from American music and or what American music means. And we talk about the beats of rock and roll and jazz and swing and soul. And so we can kind of identify some of those things that, again, if we were sitting at home, we could accomplish some of those things. But traveling puts us in plenty of situations and scenarios where we can experience some of that stuff live, occasionally, or incorporate it into the day. And I'm really amazed at the things that my kids remember from trips. I think it's very easy to focus on, are they going to remember this in the same way that I do? And what I've really come to appreciate and enjoy is that my kids remember things that I never would have thought were important or significant, and I didn't realize were, but I do through their eyes. And I'm constantly amazed at the connections that they make between things. And it's, again, not that they remember every exhibit we saw in a museum in all of its glory and detail. It's the way that they connect different animals they see in different parts of the world, or that they'll remember facts and experiences and feelings of places. And that's really what I want them to get. And so I think as a parent, I think it's an incredible experience if you're able to do it. As someone who's worked from home for almost 20 years now. My wife also has worked from home for all of this time as well. It just seems like an opportunity we have because we have the ability to collect these miles and points. We can give them some experiences that we never imagined we would have. And I find that really valuable and exciting.
Nick, this one section could have been its own episode. That was truly incredible. I think is really eye-opening, and love what you were able to do with your family there and really create an experience for them while still tying it in with the education piece. So absolutely appreciate just that overall kind of breakdown. Need to transition to part 2 here. I could spend so much more time asking you about part 1, and then part 2, I'm wondering if I took too much time on part 1, but it was just such great information to go over. But we're not going to make the listeners wait another week. We're going to cram it all into one episode here. And we got to talk about LifeMiles, right? Avianca LifeMiles. You just talked about how you booked some of your travel on this incredible trip using LifeMiles, and I think a lot of people have heard of the issues and the downsides, or not the downsides, the struggles of booking with Avianca LifeMiles, and they try to avoid it. In fact, if I see that I can book with Aeroplan something that might be, I don't know, 5K more points than it is for LifeMiles, I'm probably going to go with Aeroplan just for simplicity's sake. But I'm really curious for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about what is LifeMiles and why should people be maybe noticing it a little bit more?
Yeah, so Avianca LifeMiles is a program that is a little bit more complicated than some of the others, or at least it seems that way on the surface. And part of the complication is just that it's not the simplest, most straightforward user experience. The website isn't particularly good. Neither is the app. And so it creates some barriers that make it a little bit more difficult to deal with. However, in award travel, we often find that when there are a few extra barriers, that creates opportunities because not everybody is going to spend the time working around those. And so that might open up some windows of opportunity for you. So there are a lot of things that I like about Avianca LifeMiles. First of all, if you understand the sort of quirks of the website, you can increase your odds of finding the awards that you're looking for. Second of all, they have some very good award pricing and pricing structure. And so what I mean there is, number one, awards are generally pretty well priced to most regions of the world right from the get-go. So they have competitive pricing off the bat. But then if you dig in a little bit deeper, there are a few interesting pieces. And one is the way that they price mixed cabin awards. And so most programs, if you book, say, a business class flight from the US to Europe, charge a set number of miles, and that's the price if any leg of your trip is in business class. Whether it's a long leg or a short leg, you pay the business class price if any of your legs are in business class. Avianca handles that differently. Avianca LifeMiles charges a sort of prorated amount. So if you fly the big section, the transatlantic section in business class, but then you connect to an economy class flight, or you have an economy class connection on the front end, then they charge a percentage. Roughly, they figure what percentage of your trip was in business and what percentage of your trip is in economy, and then they charge you accordingly. And so it can reduce the cost of a transatlantic trip. So to give an example, we're taking a flight across the Atlantic where the ordinary price would have been 60,000 miles. But by having a connection in economy class, once we get to Europe, it dropped the price to around 50,000 miles a person. And so we still get our transatlantic flight in business, which is what really matters to us. We don't care whether we fly business within Europe. Within Europe, business class is usually just a blocked middle seat. And that doesn't really matter very much to us. So we're happy to have an economy class leg and significantly drop the award pricing to get to and from Europe. So that's a feature that I really like. And then the two other small quirks are, number one, the Avianca LifeMiles Plus membership, which we'll probably talk more about in a minute here. And one of the benefits of that membership is a 10% discount on award redemptions, even on partners. And so that can drop your cost per passenger even further. And then beyond that, they also have some airport combinations that price lower than you would expect, that don't seem to follow their award chart and just randomly cost fewer miles. And when I say randomly, they're consistent. For example, New York JFK to Zurich. Switzerland. It costs fewer points than flying to Geneva or Frankfurt or most other places in Europe. For some reason, no matter which partners you fly, it just costs fewer points with Avianca LifeMiles to fly that particular route. And so that's why we're going to fly to Zurich to get to Europe when we go to Europe this summer, because it costs fewer miles to get there to begin with. And then when you take the 10% discount with LifeMiles Plus, and if you were to do a mixed cabin redemption, you can easily be in the low 40s in terms of like 40,000-ish miles to get to Europe flying business class across the pond, which is a pretty good deal if you're able to find it.
Well, you've already mentioned a few of them, Nick, but are there any other kind of sweet spots within the Avianca program? I mean, that's an amazing one you just pointed out, right? So New York to Zurich, but are there any other sweet spots that you're aware of that people might want to have on their radar, whether it is within the U.S. or down to South America or over to Europe that you're aware of?
Yeah, so for a long time, there used to be one from JFK to Lisbon that used to price at 35,000 points one way in business class on TAP Air Portugal, which was a phenomenal deal. And in fact, I believe you could even book that connecting on a different carrier, Star Alliance carrier, and still pay that lower price for many years. That's no longer a route that's pricing at 35,000 miles. But what's worth mentioning here is that there are some airport combinations that price standard at 80,000 miles one way to Europe, but there are many others that price at 69,000 miles one way. So while I don't have a list of those examples off the top of my head, what I would tell you is if you're looking to go to Europe, check a number of different airports, because flying to Frankfurt may be less expensive than flying to Munich or vice versa. And you might want to take a look at the different opportunities you have there, because the pricing can be different. I'm not immediately aware of others of those sweet spots. I know that in the past, flying to Brussels from Denver was pricing lower than expected. I'm not positive whether that's still the case now. There have been a bunch of those over time, and they do change from time to time. We've also found it, by the way, connecting different regions of the world as well. So I looked for a while at flights from Germany to China, and depending on your airport combinations, again, pricing could be pretty significantly different. So if you're looking to piece together a bigger trip, it's worth checking multiple airports, and that's where award search tools can be really useful, because they can enable you to search multiple airports at once. And I'm pretty much always doing that, because, if we, for instance, want to go to Europe in the summertime and I'm looking at 4 or 5 passengers, I know that the major hurdle is going to be finding anybody that has 4 or 5 seats available in business class. And so I'll search a whole bunch of different airport combinations, because it matters more to me that we get across the Atlantic Ocean comfortably and we're able to sleep at night than it does which airport we land at once we get to Europe. Now, the Avianca LifeMiles site can be a little quirky. So when you initially do a search, it defaults to what they call a smart search. And so when you do a search on the Avianca LifeMiles site, there's a little drop down that you probably wouldn't even notice unless you knew to look for it. And it defaults to smart search, which will sometimes be smart and sometimes be very stupid. And so you may find that you'll be more successful in finding awards if you change that smart search drop down to either Star Alliance, which presumably it would be searching as part of the smart search, but sometimes it isn't searching all of the Star Alliance airlines. Or if you expect to find availability on a particular airline, out of the drop down, you can pick that particular airline. And again, sometimes the results you see will differ significantly depending on which of those 3 options you have on. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not simple, it's not intuitive, but if you know that, then it can make it far easier to find the availability you want and find some of those pricing sweet spots.
So I know there, as you mentioned, there are the quirks around the app, browsing online. I've heard a lot of things on the customer service side as well. And you talked about where LifeMiles shines, but where does it fall short in your opinion compared to booking through other Star Alliance carriers or other carriers in general, like an Aeroplan or what have you? Obviously, it has its opportunities for some great redemptions, because as you said, in this world, when there's more hurdles, you can find more opportunity. But where do you think it does fall short outside of the technical kind of glitches on the app and website side?
Yeah, so apart from the fact that you just sometimes can't find the availability that should be there because the site just doesn't work well, the other major place that it falls short is that they have pretty poor cancellation penalties, or pretty painful cancellation penalties if you were to cancel an award flight. So it can vary, but usually it's in the realm of $150 to $200 a passenger to cancel, which is sort of the antithesis of what I was talking about with award flexibility earlier. It would be very expensive to cancel an Avianca LifeMiles award. But as I said before, where there are hurdles, there are sometimes opportunities. And Avianca LifeMiles has what they call a LifeMiles Plus subscription. And so if you subscribe to one of those plans, they have plans that range from $20 a month to, I think maybe the high end is something like $180 a month. The only two plans that are worth considering are either the $20 a month plan, which is called their basic, or excuse me, I take that back. Their light plan is $20 a month, or $50 a month for their basic plan. And that's super confusing because I would think of basic as being the lowest. And that's why I had to even just stop myself right there. I made the mistake talking about it, and sometimes that confuses people. So it's worth knowing the difference here. The $20 a month subscription gives you the 10% discount on award redemptions. So if that's all you care about, then you could subscribe to that level. But the $50 a month plan adds on top of that 10% discount, it adds free changes and free cancellations. And that can work out really well. And hear me out on this, because you might hear that and say, I don't want to pay $50 a month. That's $600 a year. I don't want to pay that much money just to have free cancellations. And you're right, you probably wouldn't want to, but you also probably don't have to. So if you're strategic about it, this can actually work out really well. And so for me, I had been subscribing already to the $20 a month plan for the 10% discount because I usually redeem enough Avianca LifeMiles every year that's worthwhile. And I should mention, these subscriptions come with some miles every month. So you get a certain number of miles every month. It's not enough miles to be worth it just for that. But between those miles and the rebate, it can work out to be worthwhile. So I subscribed to that, but let's pretend I was starting at scratch and I had this Avianca LifeMiles redemption to make to Europe, which was the case. This year we were planning to fly 5 people in business class to Europe, and we were using our Avianca LifeMiles. So I subscribed to the $20 a month so I could get the 10% discount. That was pretty significant. 5 passengers at, I don't know, let's call it 60,000 miles each, 300,000 miles. So I was going to get 30,000 miles back, or off the price, just by having the $20 subscription. Now, the rules of the subscription state you have to keep your subscription for a minimum of 6 months, which means it would have cost me $120 to get that 30,000 mile discount. That's worthwhile to me because the 30,000 miles are worth significantly more than $120. And then you also get a few miles each month. So that worked out pretty well. Then later on, when we decided that, we actually want to change dates on this trip, but we didn't want to pay $150 or $200 a person, all I did was go into my LifeMiles account and upgrade to the $50 a month plan. And so that's something you could do. You could also start with no subscription and just at the time when you want to make your change or cancellation, sign up for that $50 a month subscription. And then you will get free changes and cancellations. If you sign up new, you get them right away. If you upgrade your plan, the plan doesn't take effect until your next renewal date. So keep that in mind. But I looked at that and said, okay, well, so for $50 a month, even if I paid 6 months for that, it would cost me $300, and I had 5 passengers on my itinerary. So we had to change our business class award to a different day. So for me, rather than paying $150 or $200 a person, I said, well, if I lock in this $50 a month, even if I paid that for 6 months, that'd be $300. Divided by 5, that's $60 a person to change if I didn't value the miles that I'm going to get at all. But in reality, I'll also get 2,000 miles a month. So I'll end up with 12,000 miles that cost me $300 for the miles and the ability to change our business class award to a different day. That actually worked out to me to be a solid deal. If I value those miles at 1 cent each, it's kind of like a net cost of about $180 to change the flights for 5 of us or get free cancellations. So if I look at that cost, I could say it's $30 or $40 a piece, and it's going to cost us to have free changes and cancellations for that particular trip. And then after that 6 months minimum time, I can downgrade. I can cancel my LifeMiles Plus subscription. I don't have to keep it all year long. I could just turn it on when I want to make a change or a cancellation. And so that takes that painful part out, because I can handle the $30 or $40 a person. That to me is a reasonable cost to cancel or change an award flight. And sure enough, we were able to do that very easily. Avianca LifeMiles has a reputation for poor customer service. And I think that reputation largely exists based on old impressions people had from years ago, because all of the interactions I've had with customer service over the last 2 or 3 years have been surprisingly easy and simple. And so I've been pretty impressed actually with the ability to do things like change that award. I had to call in order to do that. I expected it to be difficult and to take a long time. And in reality, it was very short and easy. The agent knew exactly what to do. It was all done correctly. So I've been pretty impressed actually the last couple of years. Their agents seem to be well trained.
So question for you here, Nick. I mean, well, first off, love that breakdown. I think the nuance and the math of like where that can make sense, because I think people have known about the LifeMiles subscription, but no one's really broken it down like you did to extrapolate where the value can be found if you're being opportunistic with it as well. So I'm curious on one of the things you said about the renewal piece. So if you're paying $20 a month as an example, and let's say you got that this month just to get that 10% discount on the award redemption, you've had it for a couple months, and then you realize you need to cancel or change and you want to upgrade to the 50, does that upgrade kick in on the next monthly billing or after the 6-month window? Like you said, you have to keep it. It doesn't kick in until your next renewal. What exact renewal are you referring to?
Yeah, so I was subscribed to the $20 a month plan before we decided that we wanted to change the trip. And so I was paying $20 a month for that plan. And my $20 monthly charge came in on the 7th of every month. It renewed on the 7th of every month. And so when I upgraded to the $50 plan, it said that upgrade would take effect on the 7th of the next month. And so that would be at the time when I would normally get charged, that's when my plan would officially move to the $50 a month basic plan. And so luckily for me, it worked out that I was doing that around the time when I was making my change or cancellation. So I waited, I think, for that to take effect officially before I called in to make my change. By the way, I should probably have explained this more clearly. My impression initially, when I heard about these subscriptions, was that I would have to be subscribed at the time when I made the award redemption. But that's not the way it's worded. The official terms say you need to be subscribed at the time when you make the change or cancellation. So you could forget about these subscriptions entirely and make your award redemption. And then if you realize you need to change or cancel, you could just subscribe to the $50 plan and same day call and change or cancel, and it's going to be free to do that. And we've heard from readers who have done that. They've just subscribed at the time when they decide they want to change or cancel, because you just need to be a subscriber at the time when you make the change or the cancellation. But you do need to be strategic about when you upgrade to that $50 plan. If you're already subscribing to the $20 plan, in my case, my subscription renewed on the 7th of every month, and our flight was going to be on the 2nd of a month. So if I had waited until near the end, like close to departure, to upgrade, my plan wouldn't have been upgraded in time to make a change or a free cancellation before the trip. So you do need to think about that if you're already a subscriber. I upgraded a little bit in advance, anticipating that we might need to make a change or a cancellation. But that'll be up to you in terms of when that's worthwhile, or if it's worthwhile to you to chance that, or to just do it with enough time. Be aware that you need to do it with enough time. Now, I think, and I haven't tested this myself, but I think that you could downgrade from the $50 plan back to the $20 plan and keep that for the rest of the 6 months in order to meet the 6-month requirement. I don't think you actually need to subscribe at the $50 level for 6 months. Like I said, I haven't tested that for myself yet. I will, but I haven't yet. So we'll see, when I get a chance to give that a test and find out. But I think that works out really well. Like you said, the math works out such that it's much less painful to change or cancel an Avianca LifeMiles redemption, knowing that you can just hop into that $50 monthly plan at the time when it's right and it makes sense for you to do that.
So, Nick, who do you think would find the most value in Avianca LifeMiles kind of overall? Is it better for perhaps families, couples? I know obviously we look for the deals, right? So there's just sometimes where the deal just drives you in one direction over the other. But are there any kind of generalities you could say just with your experience, because you've booked LifeMiles so much, of who might be wanting to look more at LifeMiles versus of another program they might be more familiar with?
Well, I think that the deal hunters among us, obviously it appeals to those of us who just want to get the best deal possible. I mentioned the JFK to Zurich route before, and so we're going to fly that this summer, JFK to Brussels to Zurich. And so Avianca LifeMiles charges 55,000 miles per passenger on that particular route. For whatever reason, in business class, it's less than other routes. And so by subscribing to Avianca LifeMiles, it took 10% off of that. So we paid 49,500 miles each. And actually, there was a 15% transfer bonus at the time when we did that from Capital One miles to Avianca LifeMiles. So it was less than 45,000 points apiece to fly in business class. Now, since I'm flying 5 people, that is a big deal to me. If I were to book that through Air Canada Aeroplan, it would have cost us 60,000 miles each. So we're talking an additional 15,000 miles per passenger times 5. That's 75,000 additional miles to book that through Air Canada Aeroplan. If I book through United, it would be 80,000 miles each. And so, then we'd be talking about an additional 35,000 miles a passenger, more than 175,000. I think that works out to be, if I did the math quickly in my head, that it would have cost me an additional 175,000 to book through United. So I think that if you're somebody who's traveling with multiple people, the savings really adds up. If I was traveling by myself, would I worry as much about the difference of 15,000 miles? Maybe not. And I could totally see someone who says, I don't want to deal with any of the potential inconvenience or worry about having to subscribe or when I subscribe, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to book through a program that I'm more familiar with, like Air Canada Aeroplan or United Mileage Plus. I could see that, but I think particularly somebody who travels with multiple passengers, or again, somebody who's very motivated by finding the deal, which just happens to be the type of personality I have, then I think Avianca LifeMiles presents some of those interesting opportunities. And I just mentioned the pricing I did for our business class flights to Europe. And if we had flown the Brussels to Zurich leg in economy class, it would have been even cheaper. It would have dropped even more. And we had that option and could have done that, but it didn't in this case. But at any rate, when I look at that, I say, okay, so that's great, A, for people who don't have an unlimited pool of miles but still want to fly comfortably. B, for people who are motivated by finding a deal. C, it can work out well, too. By the way, there are some economy class routes that price very attractively with Avianca LifeMiles as well, so it's worth hunting around and checking different airport combinations, because sometimes you'll stumble across those. They fixed this one, but for a long time, JFK to Zurich was 16,500 miles one way. And by the way, if you're relatively new to this and you hear someone like me talking about what used to work, you might sit there and say, well, how does that help me? I don't care what used to work. It doesn't work anymore. But I'll tell you that over time, I've learned an appreciation for understanding what has worked in the past, because it helps you identify what might work in the future. Whether or not it's that specific route that prices that way, the knowledge that it priced that way, to me, is valuable knowledge, because it means, well, I can look around for what else might pop up, or maybe that will come back someday. And so I think knowing about what has worked is useful for finding those opportunities in the future. But I do think that Avianca LifeMiles, I should say, is a program that is also for people who are willing to put up with a little bit of nuance and strategy. And you have to be willing to deal with a little bit of inconvenience. You're not always going to find the awards you want. You may have to call customer service. It may be a slightly unideal situation calling customer service. Sometimes things can get a little extra complicated. I made a really complicated booking once where they had to call me, and when they called me, they had to email me in order to have a payment link. And there were just more steps than what I would expect with other programs. And so if you're easily flustered, Avianca LifeMiles is probably not a program for you. But if you're willing to go with the flow and, kind of roll with the punches, then I think Avianca LifeMiles presents so much opportunity for savings that it's worth paying attention to it.
Well, Nick, I really appreciate the breakdown of Avianca and kind of where it fits in and how you've utilized it yourself, the nuances you alluded to of where you can fit that subscription in, the fact that it can be really valuable for larger families, seeing as this whole episode's been kind of themed around the family travel element of points and miles, I think is immensely helpful. Before we wrap this one up, any other last thoughts you have on Avianca LifeMiles in general? Any other tips or tidbits you want to share before we wrap this one up?
So, Avianca LifeMiles, I think the last thing is sort of the thing I mentioned at the end of what I just said, and that is it's worth keeping an eye out for those transfer bonuses because they do frequently have transfer bonuses. However, I want to caveat that with one other important point that I should have made about Avianca LifeMiles, and that is that they have one of the worst mileage expiration policies. Not the worst, but one of the worst, and this is why miles expire after just 12 months of inactivity. Most programs out there give you at least 18 months. Some never expire. Avianca LifeMiles expire after just 12 months of inactivity. So if you're going to transfer miles to Avianca, you need to make sure that you keep your Avianca LifeMiles active. Now, that's not hard to do. You can just transfer in 1,000 miles from Amex or Capital One, etc., and that will renew you for another year. And so as long as you remember to do that, that will keep your miles active in Avianca LifeMiles, or subscribing to one of the subscriptions keeps your LifeMiles active. But that's important because you don't want to forget that. I mean, ask me how I know. We did forget once and have some Avianca LifeMiles expire because I just had forgotten that they expire after 12 months and lost track of time and didn't realize how fast 12 months flew by. So I think that's something that you really do need to think about and pay attention to. Separately, one other thing that I had meant to mention about the family travel, and I know we're probably running long on time, but one other thing I wanted to mention, going back to that topic, is I think there's a lot of value in traveling with kids and having them play with kids from different places. Kids love to play, and the universal language of laughter exists everywhere, and they find ways to communicate. And I think that that's been one of the most fun things as a parent, is seeing my kids interact with local kids in different places. And it's also been a great teachable moment because inevitably those kids will speak a little bit of English and they'll say things in English or do a countdown from 10 in English. And I'll point that out to my kids that, look, here are these kids that they live in a country where English is not the primary language, but they A, have learned enough English, and B, are confident enough to try to use that with you to help make you comfortable. And I'm able to point that out and the importance of that and the value in that. And they become comfortable and they learn cool things from different kids. French Polynesia, right next to our resort, we noticed a couple of people playing in the water. One of them was a kid, and we realized that there was a stingray swimming around this kid. And so we came down to check it out. And sure enough, this kid was just in the ocean playing with a stingray that was just super playful and swimming around him. And my kids got in the water with him. And again, in that situation, the kid spoke French. He spoke a little bit of English. And our kids were able to kind of interact and play and have fun and have a really cool, memorable experience playing with this stingray in the ocean with a local family that, we wouldn't have sitting at home on the couch. And so I think that learning how to leverage programs like Avianca LifeMiles, like Alaska Atmos I mentioned we used in that program, or in that trip rather, is super valuable to be able to provide those types of experiences. And these have been indispensable tools that we've used in order to help teach our kids about the world and help them have some of those, I think, formative experiences that hopefully will make them curious world citizens that, one day are interested in exploring and learning more and more.
Nick, this has been a fantastic episode, just top to bottom, from covering those elements of the nuances of family travel to the nuances of booking travel with Avianca LifeMiles. Where can the listeners, if they're not familiar with where to find you, where can they find you?
You can go to frequentmiler.com. That's our website. And so that's the easiest place to find all of our stuff. You can subscribe to our newsletter from there. We also have a Facebook group, Frequent Miler Insiders. You can join that and ask and answer questions. And you can find me on Instagram, Nick at FM. So it's Nick AT at FM. It's for Frequent Miler. You can find me there if you'd like to find me. But again, frequentmiler.com. Frequent Miler on the Air is our podcast. So come on out, check us out. We love to pick up new listeners, and we've enjoyed listening to this show and hope maybe some of you will enjoy listening to ours as well.
Well, I can say, Nick, as we were talking in Toronto, you guys are one of the shows that I subscribe to most religiously. Make sure to never miss an episode. Get your newsletter as well. And even within our private WhatsApp community chat, a lot of the things that you guys talk about come up in our own private groups because, love everything that you guys are doing. And it's been fantastic. And having you on the show today, it's been such a treat. And we covered such a great topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Always a blast to get a chance to chat with you, and glad we were able to make this come together. It was a lot of fun for us too. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, Nick. I got two last things I always have to wrap up with. The first one is, who else should we have on the show? Who next?
Well, so you mentioned at the beginning that I was the other half of Frequent Miler, but of course, Frequent Miler is a team of 5 of us. So, we have Greg and I who have both been on this show now, but also Tim, who writes full time for us and lives on the West Coast. So he's got a slightly different approach towards award travel since he starts in a different place than we do. We have Stephen Pepper, who lives in the United Kingdom. And so he's got another experience altogether. And he and his wife did an 8-year, 50-state road trip around the United States. And I think that could actually be a really interesting topic to kind of dig into with Stephen, because they did spend years traveling around the entire United States. And I think that's a pretty cool story. And Carrie, our creative director, who spent many years traveling around, kind of as a general vagabond, I suppose, traveling place to place, and has so many cool experiences to share. So our team is a lot of fun, but there are so many other great voices out there in Miles and Points as well. So many people whose material I enjoy reading and whose podcasts I enjoy listening to. So I think you can pull out some other great stuff. If you were in Toronto, of course, I know you were, there were so many excellent speakers there. Ben from Ben's Big Deal always has lots of interesting information to share. And Tara McAndrew from Travel with T-Mick also, again, lots of cool stuff to follow. So, there's so many people in this space that I love that it's hard for me to break it down to one, but I'm going to suggest that you get all of them on here, DeAndre.
I will work to do that. I'm going to collect the Frequent Miler Infinity Gauntlet and get all the all the members of the team on the show. Any final thoughts, Nick, before we wrap this one up?
No, I just want to say thank you again. This was a blast, and I hope to be able to come back again someday and enjoy another conversation. I look forward to seeing you at the next Miles and Points event.
Yep, the next Points and Miles event in Chicago. Looking forward to it. Awesome, Nick. Thank you so much again for being on the show. For the listeners out there, if you enjoyed the show today, be sure to follow us on all the social media channels. Sign up for our newsletter, our private Facebook group. Remember, the private Facebook group and the newsletter are the only ways to get access to our private WhatsApp community chat, which is completely free to join as well. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, leave a review, do all the things, and we will catch you on the next episode. Take care.
Nick here with an update from the future. So as fate would have it, just days after DeAndre and I recorded this episode and this conversation, Avianca LifeMiles made some major changes to their award chart, or their award pricing anyway. They don't really publish a chart per se anymore, but the way that their awards price changed significantly. So you're going to hear us talk about some features of the program that are no longer there. I reference some specific sweet spots for particular routings to Europe that no longer price the way that they did up until a few weeks ago. And I reference mixed cabin award pricing, which is no longer a thing in the way that I describe it in this episode. That said, Avianca LifeMiles still has some strengths. On the surface, they really destroyed things, increasing award pricing on some routes by massive amounts. I'm talking one-way business class awards to Europe that now cost more than 90,000 miles one way. In cases like those, you will generally be better off booking via Air Canada Aeroplan. You'll probably pay many fewer miles for the same type of award. However, there are some exceptions to that. And so, you'll hear us talk about sort of the flat business class rate to Europe in this episode. I think I reference around 69,000 miles for many routes, and that still holds true. There are many routes that still price at 69,000 miles one way. So after the 10% LifeMiles Plus subscriber discount, you're paying just over 62,000 miles one way. The interesting thing is that there are situations where flying further will still cost you less, not in the mixed cabin way that I described in our conversation, but by finding those particular city pairings where Avianca charges fewer miles. So to give you a simple for instance, New York to Frankfurt on Lufthansa now costs 92,400 Avianca LifeMiles one way in business class. That's an outrageous business class price, much higher than it used to be. However, if you fly that Lufthansa leg from New York to Frankfurt, and then you connect on to Paris, the price drops to 69,000 miles one way. That's because Avianca has this weird pricing thing where certain city pairs, like New York to Paris, just cost fewer miles, whichever way you get there. And so then if you're a LifeMiles Plus subscriber, you'll pay a little over 62,000 miles. So rather than just flying New York to Frankfurt, continuing on to Paris will save you 30,000 miles, a huge chunk of the price. And so it'll pay to hunt around and look for those opportunities. It'll be particularly appealing still for people based on the West Coast, because while Air Canada Aeroplan will enjoy a huge advantage on some of the East Coast pricing and a small advantage even on some of Avianca's best deals from the East Coast, Air Canada Aeroplan runs a hybrid sort of award chart, zone-based and distance-based. So people based on the West Coast have to pay more miles, essentially, for flights to Europe through Air Canada Aeroplan. Avianca LifeMiles, on the other hand, still charges that same 69,000 miles in business class from, say, Los Angeles to Paris, I believe, anyway. It's an example. And there are many more like it. And so that will become advantageous for folks based on the West Coast. So while the pricing anomalies in the way that I described them in this episode don't exactly live on, some of the awesome features, I think, of Avianca LifeMiles are still there. Speaking of features, the website remains sort of a mess. It's hard to find the awards that you want to find, and you need to kind of navigate around it, know your way around the website in order to navigate it successfully. That's both a feature and a bug, in my opinion. Obviously, it's frustrating when you can't find the award you want to find. The feature sort of part of that, the positive side of that, is that things that are harder to find naturally have less competition in finding them. So if you're able to look under more rocks, you'll find more things than someone who doesn't know where to look. And so a tip there is, for instance, when you're doing an award search on Avianca LifeMiles website, there's a drop-down menu that by default starts on Smart Search. And I've often joked in the past that the Smart Search is anything but, because there are a number of other filter options. You can choose to filter by Star Alliance, filter by specific airlines, and it's worth trying those different drop-downs, or they'll sometimes show up as checkboxes over your search results. Try checking the different boxes, because sometimes Avianca charges a different number of miles depending on which partner you fly, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but they seem to have some preferential partner pricing. So it's worth checking all of those boxes and seeing what additional opportunities might pop up other than what's shown in the Smart Search at first. You're not always going to find something awesome there, but at least you increase your odds of finding something you want to find. Overall, I still think that the LifeMiles Plus subscription, as you'll hear us talk about, is a great feature of Avianca LifeMiles that can make a lot of sense, particularly for family travelers, those traveling with multiple passengers. And I'll explain why in our conversation, but I wanted to update with those changes because Avianca did devalue big chunks of their award pricing scheme just after we had this conversation. So I just wanted listeners to be aware that some of the specifics of what I talk about have changed a bit.